My belt was in my hand. My laptop flat on the gray tray. I was calculating the minutes to the gate when the air around me changed. 2 police officers and a TSA agent didn't just approach me. They swarmed. They didn't ask for ID. They blocked my path. Step out of line. Now. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just looked at the tablet the officer was holding. A code red flag next to my name. The accusations were specific. Psychotic break. Suicidal. And the kicker, possession of explosive materials. My parents hadn't just tried to delay me. They had tried to bury me. Before we dive into this nightmare, drop a comment and let me know what's the one line you would never cross. Even for family? I'm reading every single one. They marched me into a glass-walled holding room that smelled like floor wax and stale adrenaline. Officer Miller pointed to the metal chair bolted to the linoleum. He didn't have to tell me to sit. I knew the drill. When authority flexes, you don't fight the muscle. You analyze the leverage. He stood across from me, arms crossed, waiting for the meltdown. He was expecting the shaking hands, the hyperventilating, the frantic pleas of a terrified traveler. But he didn't know who was sitting in that chair. I don't manage emotions for a living. I manage global supply chains. My entire career is built on moving high-value assets through hostile territories while the world is burning down around me. Chaos isn't a crisis to me. It's just data. I looked at the clock on the wall. 4 hours until the probate hearing in San Francisco. My grandfather's estate was valued at $4,800,000. If I missed that gavel drop, my parents wouldn't just win by default. They would file an ex parte motion for emergency conservatorship. They didn't just want the money. They wanted legal ownership of me. Miller opened a folder. Ms. Holloway. We received a call 8 minutes ago. The reporting party claims you are in the midst of a severe psychotic break. They stated you have a history of self-harm and that you are currently carrying improvised explosive materials. The air left the room. Explosives. They went nuclear. A psychotic break would get me a 72-hour hold in a psychiatric ward. That was enough to miss the hearing. But a bomb threat? That triggered federal jurisdiction. That put me on the no-fly list forever. That was a career-ending, life-ruining designation. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. But it wasn't fear. It was clarity. Any normal person would be crying right now. They would be screaming that their parents love them. That this must be a mistake. But I didn't shed a tear. This is the trap of normalized cruelty. When you grow up in a house where affection is a transaction and sabotage is a parenting technique, you don't get shocked when the knife goes in. You just check the depth of the wound. My parents had spent 29 years training me to handle this exact moment. They thought they were breaking me. But they were just inoculating me. I looked Miller in the eye. My pulse was steady. Officer Miller. I said, my voice flat. I am not psychotic. I am not suicidal. And I certainly do not have a bomb. What I have is a grandfather who left me everything. And 2 parents who are willing to commit a federal felony to stop me from claiming it. Miller blinked. The lack of hysterics threw him off script. This is a family dispute? He asked. Skepticism heavy in his tone. This is a hostile takeover. I corrected. My parents, Richard and Patricia Holloway, are attempting to secure a conservatorship over me. They need me detained. Incompetent. Or missing before 2 o'clock this afternoon. This report isn't a safety warning. It's a strategic delay tactic. Officer Singh, the partner, stepped forward. You're saying your parents called in a bomb threat on their own daughter? I'm saying my father is a narcissist who believes the Patriot Act is a customer service line he can use to return a defective product. I said, he knows the keywords. He knows unstable gets me stopped. But bomb gets me buried. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table so they could see I wasn't trembling. I can prove it, I said. But you have to stop treating me like a suspect and start treating this like an audit. Miller hesitated. An audit? Check the call log, I said. Check the carrier metadata. A random witness blocks their number. A concerned citizen uses a payphone. But Richard Holloway? He's too arrogant for that. He thinks he owns the police department. I guarantee you, that call came from his personal cell phone. Miller stared at me for a long beat. He looked at Singh. Then he looked back at me. I wasn't acting like a crazy woman. I was acting like a consultant fixing a broken workflow. Check the number, I repeated. And when you see his name, ask yourself why a terrified father would wait until I was already at the airport to call. Miller pulled his radio from his belt. Stay here. He walked out. I watched him go. I didn't relax. I just recalculated the timeline. Officer Miller stepped back into the room. The door clicked shut, sealing us back in the silence. But the air had changed. He wasn't looking at me like a suspect anymore. He was looking at me like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. I checked the dispatch log, he said, tapping the folder in his hand. The reporting party claims you called him 3 times this morning between 6 and 7 a.m. He states you were incoherent, making specific threats against his life and the safety of the airport. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I simply unlocked my phone and slid it across the metal table. Audit it, I said. Miller looked down at the screen. My call history is open. I continued. Scroll back. The last call I made was to my Uber driver at 7:15. Before that, a work call yesterday at 5. There are no outgoing calls to Richard Holloway. Not at 6 a.m. Not ever. I blocked his number 6 months ago. Miller scrolled. He checked the timestamps. He checked the duration. 0. 0. 0. The data didn't lie. He could claim you used a different phone, Miller said. But the conviction was leaking out of his voice. He could. I agreed. But why would I threaten him? I hold all the leverage. I'm the sole beneficiary of the estate. He's the one desperate to stop the clock. I reached for the phone, pulled it back, and opened my saved voicemails. You want to know who was making threats this morning? I asked. Listen to this. I had received the voicemail at 5:03 a.m. It was from a blocked number, but I knew the voice before the first syllable hit the air. It wasn't my father. It was Patricia. My mother didn't scream. She didn't yell. She spoke with the chilling, quiet cadence of a woman who believed she owned me. I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear in the small room. Shelby, this is your mother. We know you're packing. We know you think you can just walk away with your grandfather's money. You're not going to that hearing. If you step foot in that airport, Richard and I will make sure you never make your own decisions again. We have the paperwork ready. We have the doctors lined up. You are sick, Shelby, and we are going to lock you away until you learn to be a part of this family again. The recording ended. Officer Singh, who had been silent until now, let out a sharp breath. She looked at Miller. Her eyes were wide. That's not a concerned parent, Singh said quietly. That's a threat of unlawful confinement. It's a promise. I corrected. They aren't trying to save me from a breakdown. They are trying to manufacture one so they can file for emergency conservatorship. They need me to look dangerous so they can look like saviors. I looked Miller dead in the eye. That voicemail was left 3 hours before your department received a call claiming I was a terrorist threat. Do you think that's a coincidence? Or do you think it's a strategy? Miller ran a hand over his face. The narrative he'd been fed was crumbling. He looked at the transcript of the bomb threat in his hand. Then at my phone. If this is true, Miller said slowly, then the call to us. It wasn't a warning. It was a swatting. I said. They used you. They used your badge, your gun, and your authority to enforce a family grudge. They weaponized the police department because they knew you wouldn't bother to check the source. Miller stiffened. I had hit a nerve. No cop likes to realize they're just a pawn in a rich man's game. I need to verify the source of the bomb threat, Miller said, his voice hard. Now. You do, I said. And when you check the carrier metadata, don't just look for the name. Look at the location. Because Richard Holloway is too arrogant to hide. Miller walked out of the room again. But this time, he left the door cracked open. I could hear him on the radio. His voice low. Urgent. Stripped of the bureaucratic boredom he'd started with. He was talking to dispatch. He was asking for a subscriber check. He was asking for a real-time ping. I sat back in the metal chair and waited. I didn't fidget. Fidgeting implies nervousness. And nervousness implies guilt. I sat with the stillness of an auditor waiting for the bank records to download. 10 minutes later, Miller returned. He didn't look at me. He looked at the tablet in his hand with a kind of offended disbelief. He placed it on the table between us. sliding it forward just enough for me to see the screen. "We ran the number that called in the threat," he said. "It wasn't blocked. It wasn't a burner. It's a postpaid Verizon account registered to a Richard Holloway. Billing address in Atherton." I nodded. Of course it was. We also pulled the carrier location data for the time of the call. Miller continued, his voice tightening. "The device pinged a tower 3 miles from here. Specifically, the geolocation puts the caller in the south parking lot of the San Francisco probate court. There it was. The digital fingerprint. He's at the courthouse," I said. "He called in a bomb threat from the very place he's asking a judge to declare me incompetent." Miller looked at me. And for the first time, I saw the anger in his eyes. It wasn't directed at me anymore. It was directed at the man who had wasted his time, risked his career, and mocked his intelligence. "Why?" Miller asked. "If he's smart enough to orchestrate a conservatorship, why use his own phone? Why be this sloppy? Because he doesn't think he's a criminal," I said. "This is the arrogance of the good family. Men like Richard Holloway don't use burner phones or voice scramblers because those are tools for bad people, drug dealers, kidnappers, thieves. My father sees himself as a pillar of the community. He believes his last name is a form of diplomatic immunity. He assumed that when the police saw Holloway on the caller ID, they wouldn't see a suspect. They would see a concerned citizen doing his civic duty. He didn't cover his tracks, because he truly believes that the laws of physics and evidence bend around him. He thinks the police work for him. He assumed you wouldn't check." I told Miller. "He thought you'd hear bomb, panic, detain me, and file the paperwork later. He banked on your incompetence." Miller's jaw flexed. I had handed him the leverage he needed to turn this from a security stop into a criminal investigation. "He was wrong," Miller said. "He was." I agreed. "And now you have a choice. You can keep me here while he steals my life. Or you can let me get on that plane and prove to a federal judge that your department isn't his private security force." Miller picked up the tablet. He tapped the screen, closing the file on me and opening a new one. "You're not a suspect, Ms. Holloway," he said. "You're a witness. Does that mean I'm free to go?" "It means you're cleared," he said. "But you need to move fast. Because once I file this update, the FBI is going to get involved. And they aren't going to be looking for you. They're going to be looking for the man who called in a false threat of terrorism." "Let them look," I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. "I'll tell them exactly where to find him." "You're clear," Miller said. 2 words that should have felt like relief but felt like ammunition. "But Ms. Holloway, listen to me. Because the report used the specific keyword bomb. The threat assessment protocol has already been activated. The FBI has been notified. Joint Terrorism Task Force is looped in." "I understand," I said. "I don't think you do," he pressed, his voice dropping an octave. "They don't close these files. They investigate the source. If what you're saying is true and the data says it is, your father didn't just file a false police report. He committed a federal crime. Interference with flight crew. False information and hoaxes. Wire fraud. When I file this clearance, the Bureau is going to pivot the investigation from you to him." "Good," I said. "Let them work." I didn't wait for permission. I grabbed my handle and walked out. I had 20 minutes to get to gate 54. I moved through the terminal with the efficiency of a package on a conveyor belt. No wasted motion. I reached the gate just as the final boarding call echoed. The agent at the counter was typing furiously. She looked up, saw my face, and paused. She had watched the police escort me away 30 minutes ago. "Ms. Holloway?" she asked. "I'm making this flight." I said, "I know," she replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I reinstated your ticket 5 minutes ago." I stopped. "Reinstated? Someone called the reservation line while you were with the police," she said, lowering her voice. "A man. He claimed to be you. He had your confirmation code. He tried to cancel the itinerary to save the credit, but he failed the security question. Richard. He was thorough. He wanted to make sure that even if the police let me go, I'd be stranded at the gate with a voided ticket. He wanted to seal every exit." "Did you log the call?" I asked. "It's in the PNR notes," she said. She ripped a thermal printout from the machine and slid it across the counter. It shows the time, the attempt, and the caller ID. It matches the number you gave the police. I took the slip. It was thin, flimsy paper, but it weighed more than gold. It was proof of malice. Proof of intent. Thank you, I said. I walked down the jet bridge. I found my seat. 14A. I didn't look at the other passengers. I sat down, buckled in, and immediately opened my laptop. As the plane pushed back and the engines whined to life, I was no longer just a passenger. I was a ghost. My parents believed I was detained in a security room, stripped of my phone and my dignity. They thought the board was clear. They thought they were walking into that courtroom unopposed to tell a tragedy about their unstable daughter. They didn't know I was currently taxiing to the runway, hurtling toward them at 500 miles an hour. I paid for the high-speed Wi-Fi. The moment we hit 10,000 feet, I connected. I opened my email client. I drafted a new message. To Clerk of the Probate Court, Department 4. Subject: Urgent supplemental evidence. Estate of Holloway. I attached the files. The voicemail audio. The photo of the police incident card. The airline access log showing the cancellation attempt. I didn't write a long story. I wrote a status report. To the Honorable Court. The petitioner, Richard Holloway, is currently attempting to mislead the court regarding my absence. Attached is evidence that the petitioner filed a false federal bomb threat against me this morning to prevent my attendance. I am currently airborne and request to appear via video link to testify to these facts. I hit send. The progress bar filled. Sent. I leaned back. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. The San Francisco probate court wasn't a place for justice. It was a theater for transactions. Mahogany paneling, acoustic tiles, and the low hum of expensive HVAC systems designed to keep the air sterile. On my laptop screen at 30,000 feet, the feed was crisp. I had logged into the court's public access portal while I waited for the clerk to process my emergency request. I was the ghost in the machine. Watching my own funeral, my parents sat at the petitioner's table. They looked perfect. Richard was wearing his boardroom suit charcoal gray, not black, because black implies hopelessness, and he wanted to project burdened responsibility. Patricia sat beside him, clutching a tissue she hadn't used yet. Her posture slumped just enough to suggest a mother's heartbreak. Their lawyer, Mr. Vance, stood at the podium. He was a specialist in high-asset family law, the kind of shark you hire when you want to strip a carcass clean without getting blood on your cuffs. Your Honor, Vance said, his voice dropping to a practiced, somber register. It brings my clients no joy to be here today. This isn't about the estate. It's about safety. Ms. Holloway has a history of volatility, but the events of the last 24 hours have escalated beyond a family matter into a public safety crisis. I watched Vance gesture to a stack of filings affidavits signed by my parents, detailing imaginary outbursts, fabricated drug use, and a mental decline that existed only in their narrative. They were painting a portrait of a woman who needed to be managed, not a beneficiary who needed to be paid. We are requesting emergency letters of conservatorship, Vance continued. We need immediate control over her assets and her medical decisions. Not to control her, but to protect her from herself. The $4.8 million in the trust is a danger to a person in her condition. Judge Sterling sat behind the bench. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that gave nothing away. He flipped through the file, his eyes scanning the lies my parents had paid billable hours to construct. And you have made attempts to notify the respondent? Sterling asked. Is Miss Holloway aware of this hearing? We have tried everything, Your Honor. Vance lied. Calls, emails, texts. We even sent a courier to her residence. She has absconded. We believe she is currently unreachable. Richard nodded solemnly from the table. He looked down at his hands, playing the part of the devastated father who had tried everything. It was a masterclass. If I hadn't been the one they were hunting, I might have believed him. Sterling stopped turning pages. He looked over his glasses at my father. Mr. Holloway, the judge said, I want to be very clear. You are asking this court to strip an adult woman of her civil liberties on an ex parte basis. This is an extreme remedy. Are you stating Under oath. That you do not know where your daughter is? This was the trap. The arrogance trap. Richard didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with the gravity of a statesman. Your Honor, Richard said, his voice trembling with just the right amount of faux reluctance. I didn't want to say this in open court, but I received a call this morning. Shelby isn't just missing. She is currently in police custody. The lie hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Custody? Sterling asked. Yes, sir, Richard said. She was detained at the airport. For her own safety, she was unstable, violent. The officers had no choice. I watched my father's face on the pixelated screen. He looked relieved. He thought he had just played the ace. He thought that by claiming I was in custody, he had explained my absence and proven my insanity in one breath. He didn't know that the email I sent 5 minutes ago had just landed in the court clerk's inbox. He didn't know he had just perjured himself on a federal record. Judge Sterling raised his gavel. The wood hovered in the air. A pendulum about to swing shut on my freedom, given the respondent's absence and the gravity of the father's testimony. Sterling began. I am prepared to grant the emergency. Your Honor. The court clerk's voice cracked like a whip. She stood up, her hand pressing an earpiece against her head, her other hand waving a tablet. Urgent evidentiary filing, she said, breathless. Received 30 seconds ago via the secure priority channel. It is flagged as exculpatory evidence regarding the whereabouts of the respondent. Sterling froze. The gavel didn't drop. He lowered it slowly, resting it on the block without a sound. He held out his hand. The clerk rushed the tablet to the bench. The room went dead silent. This is the moment where time dilates. I watched the pixels on my screen freeze as the bandwidth struggled to keep up with the tension. Richard was staring at the judge, a bead of sweat tracing a slow line down his temple. Patricia had stopped her performance. She was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. Sterling read. He didn't just glance. He read every line. I saw his eyes narrow behind his wire-rimmed glasses. I saw the color rise in his neck. Then he looked up. He didn't look at the lawyer. He looked directly at my father. Mr. Vance, Sterling said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I suggest you take a step away from your client. Vance, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, physically moved 2 feet to the left. Clerk, Sterling ordered. Activate the remote video feed. Now. The massive monitors on the courtroom wall flickered. Static. Then clarity. My face appeared. 4 feet high, crisp and composed against the beige leather of the airplane seat. I wasn't in a holding cell. I wasn't in handcuffs. I was sipping sparkling water in 14A. Ms. Holloway, Sterling said. Are you currently in police custody? No. Your Honor, I said, my voice echoing through the courtroom speakers. I am currently at 35,000 feet. Over Nevada. I boarded my flight 40 minutes ago, immediately after being cleared by the San Francisco Airport Police. Richard stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. She's lying. Sit down, Sterling roared. The power in his voice pinned my father back into his seat. Ms. Holloway, Sterling continued, his eyes never leaving my father's face. You sent a document titled Incident Report. Do you wish for this to be entered into the record? I do. Your Honor, I said. Specifically, the section regarding the origin of the threat. Sterling picked up the tablet. He read aloud, his voice projecting to the back of the room. Incident number 992 Alpha. Nature of call. Bomb threat. Investigation conclusion. Unfounded malicious. Suspect identified via carrier metadata. Richard Holloway. The air was sucked out of the room. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Richard's face went from red to a sickly ash gray. You called in a bomb threat, Sterling said, the words heavy with disgust. You wasted police resources, grounded security, and perjured yourself in my courtroom, all to steal an estate. It was a mistake, Richard whispered, his voice cracking. I just wanted to stop her. You stopped her. All right, Sterling said. You stopped her from trusting you ever again. But the nightmare wasn't over for him. It was just beginning. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they were thrown wide. 2 men in windbreakers entered, followed by 2 uniformed officers. They didn't look like bailiffs. They moved with the aggressive, focused energy of federal authority. "Federal agents," the lead officer announced. "Nobody move." They walked straight down the center aisle. They ignored the lawyer. They ignored the clerk. They stopped directly behind my father, Richard Holloway. The agent said, "You are under arrest for violation of Title 18. United States Code. Section 35. Imparting or conveying false information regarding an explosive device." Richard didn't fight. He slumped. He looked small. A man whose arrogance had finally written a check his status couldn't cash. They pulled his arms back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting tight was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Click. 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 "Patricia Holloway." The agent continued. "You are being detained for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Patricia screamed. It wasn't a performance this time. It was the sound of her world shattering. "Motion for conservatorship denied," Sterling said, slamming the gavel down with finality. "With prejudice. I am removing Richard and Patricia Holloway as executors immediately. The court appoints an independent fiduciary to manage the transfer of assets to the sole beneficiary. Shelby Holloway." I watched them drag my parents out. They looked at the camera one last time. Richard's eyes met mine through the screen. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked terrified. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just reached out and closed my laptop. 2 days later, I stood in the departures terminal at SFO again. But this time, everything was different. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was standing in the first-class check-in line, holding a ticket to Tokyo. One way, the estate transfer was complete. Judge Sterling had ruled swiftly, granting me the full inheritance and naming an independent trustee to handle the liquidation of assets so I wouldn't have to deal with the messy details. The house, the accounts, the investments, it was all mine. Or rather, the proceeds would be. I didn't want the things. I wanted the freedom they bought. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. But the preview text told me everything. "Shelby. Please. It's Mom. Dad is in jail. They won't let him out on bail. I need money for a lawyer. Please. Baby. We're family." I stared at the words. Family. That word had been a cage for 29 years. It had been a weapon they used to keep me compliant, to keep me quiet, to keep me serving their needs while they ignored mine. Family was the reason I had almost missed my grandfather's funeral because they forgot to call me. Family was the reason I was nearly arrested in this very airport. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt like a logistician looking at a bad contract. The terms were unacceptable. The liabilities were too high. It was time to terminate the agreement. I didn't reply. I tapped the info icon, scrolled down, and hit block caller. Then I went into my settings and changed my number. I deleted my social media apps. I wiped the slate clean. "Ms. Holloway?" the agent at the counter asked. "We're ready for you." I walked up, handing over my passport. "Checking a bag?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just carry on." I traveled light now. I had left the baggage behind. I walked through security, the pre-check lane this time. Breezy and fast. No one stopped me. No alarms went off. I walked to the gate, boarded the plane, and took my seat in 1A. A flight attendant offered me a glass of champagne. "Celebrating something?" she asked, noticing the smile I couldn't quite suppress. "Yes," I said, taking the glass. "A successful audit." She laughed, not understanding. But I toasted the air anyway. I looked at the departure board one last time before they closed the door. All green. On time. The world was open. And for the first time in my life, the flight plan was entirely up to me. If you've ever had to save yourself because the people who were supposed to protect you became the ones hunting you, share this story. You are not crazy. You are just awake.